Hey everyone, Forrest here with Rocky Mountain School of Photography, and today we're going to do my best low light settings guide for the brand new Insta360 Ace Pro. Let's go ahead and dive in. One important note before we get into any part of this video is for me to be honest with you all and tell you that Insta360 did provide me with this camera for the purposes of this setup guide. It's one of the reasons I'm not doing a review. I don't do reviews in trade for products, but I definitely do setup guides. So we are going to be diving in, but I want to be completely transparent that I did not pay for this. However, we're just talking settings today, not my overall feelings. So let's dive in. Now, a couple quick disclaimers. Number one, this is not going to be a quick tips video. My goal here is that you understand this camera and why to set it the way that you're supposed to set it. I want you to be able to make informed decisions. So if you own this camera, sit back, relax. We're going to walk through the whole thing. Number two, I'm not going to talk about every single setting. I'm going to focus primarily on low light videography and how to optimize this camera for that specifically. Finally, number three, I have left timestamps down in the description so you can skip ahead to the information that you are most interested in. The final disclaimer is that I am running the newest firmware on my Insta360 Ace Pro. So if you just got your camera, take it out of the box, install the Insta360 app on your phone, connect the two, and you should be prompted to download the latest firmware version to your camera. Also, I want to say that every setting I'm going over today on the camera is also adjustable on the app. I don't always like to have my phone out when I'm shooting. I like to kind of focus in on the camera. So I'm going to be doing camera settings, but if you're a phone person, you like the bigger interface, it's just a little bit easier. You can follow along there as well. All right, without further ado, let's start. So I want to start with our general purpose settings. The way that we're going to get there is by dragging down from the top, and we have these 8 buttons. Now, these all turn on and off different features and functions of the camera. We're actually going to skip these, swipe over to the right, and go to the little gear. Inside of here, we can see the firmware version of our camera, some other options for some different things. The big one that I want to point out is the one that says SD card or secure digital card. You are going to need to have an SD card in the camera in order to record, and the first thing I recommend you do when putting a new card in the camera is go to the SD card option and say format SD card. Now, big disclaimer, this will delete all footage on the card. So do beware of that. Formatting means deleting the data. However, it also teaches this specific card how to function best with this specific camera. So one of the biggest things I see people run into when they're starting to get started shooting is they get corrupted photos and videos on their memory card. And one of the most common causes of that is not formatting the card in the camera that you are going to use it in. So I like to get in the habit of anytime I put a new card into any camera, I format it first thing. Again, understanding that that's going to erase the data, so everything should be backed up down the line. Okay, so I'm going to go to format SD card and I'm going to confirm. Now, once that format's successful, we can back out. The next thing I want to mention in these general settings is this thing that says image settings. Tap on that, and this lets us adjust some global settings for all modes of shooting video on this camera. And I recommend a couple things. First of all, set your video sharpness to low. Video sharpness is an artificial digital sharpening that can make your footage look more sharp, that's true, but it also sometimes leads to your footage looking a little bit less professional. I recommend shooting low sharpness in the camera, and if you need a little bit more sharpness, add that in post-production. So I'm going to set mine to low. Additionally, I'm going to set my video encoding and be sure that it's on H.265. The only reason I would change this back to H.264 is if I had an older computer or phone that was incapable of processing H.265 files. That's pretty rare these days. Most of the world has switched over to an H.265 encoding, so I don't think you'll need to worry about it. And on H.265, you'll fit more data or more videos on your memory card. Finally, I'm going to go down to bitrate, and I'm going to be sure that my bitrate is set to high, not standard. This basically means that you're going to get better footage out of the camera. And one thing I really like about the Insta360 Ace Pro is its high bitrate. The bitrate of the Insta360 is actually considerably higher than that of the latest GoPro, and that just means that your footage per second will look better. You'll have better, cleaner looking footage. Now, that is necessary because this does have an 8K sensor, so it needs that higher bitrate in order to keep up, but we want to maximize the bit rate because that maximizes the quality and the good lookingness of our footage. The only other item in this general purpose settings that I want to mention is down at the very bottom where it says reset camera. This is one of those things, I haven't run into it with the Ace Pro particularly, but with some action cameras, they get a little bit buggy after you use them for a while. So I'm in kind of a habit of whenever my camera starts acting up, that reset camera button will send us back to the factory defaults, and it usually fixes tons of issues. So from there, I'm going to go ahead and back up to our little grid of settings here, and this will be the next section of our video. Let's now talk about our 16 quick setting buttons. We can get to these by whatever mode we're in, simply swiping down from the top of the camera, and we'll be left with these options. Now, if you've ever used a GoPro before, many of these will be familiar to you. I'm gonna go through them one at a time and give you a brief overview of what they do. Number one here, the little rocket ship, is called Quick Capture. With Quick Capture on, the camera, when the shutter button or the take a video button, record button is pressed, if the camera is off, it will turn itself on and start a recording. Makes it a little bit quicker to go from camera off to recording footage. With Quick Capture off, you would actually have to power on the camera and then start a recording versus just being able to push one button. I actually really like Quick Capture. The only time I'm gonna turn it off is if I'm gonna throw my camera in a pocket or a camera bag, somewhere where the record button might get pressed accidentally, and that would cause the camera to turn on and record the inside of my camera bag for however long. So in those instances, I'll turn it off, but it is a nice time saver. This second option is rotation lock. This camera has a little accelerometer in it that can tell which position it's in, and this can be really nice if you are, say, wanting to just shoot horizontal video, but you might be rotating the camera a little bit and you want it to keep in that horizontal orientation, you can lock it. The same would be true as if you wanted to record upside down footage. Normally what would happen is if you did not have that on, when you rotated the camera upside down, it would actually auto rotate the footage to be right side up. So this can be a good override for that. However, if this is off, it's going to allow you to shoot vertical or horizontal or footage it with the camera in any orientation, which can be nice for unique mounting options. Option 3 and 4, I'm not a huge fan of. I haven't messed with them much, but in general, these are not the things that I like to do because I'm not an action sports athlete. I use these cameras for like fun photos of family, friends, events, things like that. Number 3 is gesture control. This can be awesome if you have the camera up on a selfie stick and you're trying to trigger the camera to record or stop recording without actually touching the camera itself. There's a whole bunch of gestures you can use. Consult the manual or the app for more on that. Number 4 is voice control. And again, similarly to what's available on a GoPro, this allows us to use very simple voice commands to record and stop recording on the camera. Options number 5 and 6 may or may not be available depending on your settings. If you're in a really high resolution setting, these may be turned off by default. But number 5 is pre-recording. This essentially means that the camera is going to be recording all the time, regardless of whether you've hit the record button. But it's going to be throwing away the footage it records after a certain duration of time. What this allows you to do is if something cool does happen and the camera was recording it, you can hit the record button, which will save that footage down to the card. This can be really useful if you know some action is going to happen out there in the field of view that you're shooting, but you don't know when it's going to happen. You can leave this pre-record on all the time. It's going to constantly be recording. And then when you see the action happen, say fireworks go off or something cool, if you immediately press the record button, it will actually go back in time and record what has already happened and save that to the card. Again, only available in some recording modes because otherwise it does drain the battery a lot. No matter what your mode you're on, it's going to drain the battery a lot, but it can be cool in certain situations. Finally, number 6 is our AI Highlights Assistant. Again, this is going to be dependent on the mode that you're in, whether it's available. But what this is going to do is use AI to watch the footage that you record and identify highlight moments, basically cool stuff that the AI thinks that you want to focus on. And this is all available in the app. When you go to review the footage, you can go open up the app and it will show you, hey, these are the cool things that happened. I personally, again, because I don't use these cameras for action type situations, have not messed with this, but it does appear to be a very cool feature. Finally, we have screen brightness, pretty self-explanatory, and our lock. If we are going to use the camera underwater, you can lock the screen so that you don't inadvertently get it to be pressed. If you're trying to unlock, it does require you to swipe up to then unlock the screen once that screen lock has been applied. This next setting here with the little speaker icon is your prompt sound. This is just the camera beeping essentially. I always leave that off. I find the in-camera beeping a little bit annoying. Our next option is this little light that's called our indicator light or tally light. That's simply the little blinking red light that is going when the camera is recording. I usually like that on. Really the only times you would turn it off is if you were recording an event and the people you were recording, you didn't want the red light to be flashing in their faces, or if you were even shooting a reflective object, say something in a mirror or something like that, that recording light's gonna be a little bit distracting. Next up is our grid overlay. I like that on. All that's gonna do is overlay a 3x3 grid over our video footage. I find that useful for lining up horizons and the like, but you can choose whether that's important to you. Our next option is sound. We have our audio settings. This camera actually gives you quite a bit of options when it comes to sound. Stereo is gonna record a left channel and a right channel. Wind reduction is gonna reduce the wind noise, and direction focus is gonna try to keep the focus of the audio in front of the camera. This is an example of the stereo microphone mode. I'm gonna go ahead and turn the camera one direction and then turn the camera the other direction so you all can hear the difference. This is an example of the direction focus microphone modes. This is the wind noise reduction mode as far as audio settings are concerned. There is no wind this morning. You can see the snow's falling straight down, but hopefully you can hear a difference between this and those other modes. Now, normally I like direction focus. I think that stereo left and right is not as important as getting really clear audio of what I'm pointing the camera at. Do beware though that Insta360 does sell a little microphone adapter, I'll hold it up here, that plugs in the side of the camera and allows you to run a standard 3.5mm microphone into the camera, which is pretty sweet. So if you have a little Rode Video Micro or something like that, that can be a great option. Also, those external mics are gonna produce much better sound than what we can get with the built-in mic. So if you are gonna use this for vlogging, that would be an accessory I would highly recommend. I actually made a video on the Rode Video Micro. You guys can check that out up there in the corner. I'll leave it in the description as well to learn more. All right, we've got 4 more. Our fourth to last is timed capture. This actually allows you to program the camera to turn on at a certain future time and record for a certain duration. Now, this is useful for a lot of things, but one of my favorite uses is star trails or Milky Way photography. You can actually leave this camera out in the weather, tell it to do a timed capture at 2 a.m., go to sleep, the camera's gonna turn on, it's gonna run its sequence, and you're gonna be left with footage in the morning. Pretty cool stuff. So that's easily turn onable there. This next option is for the Bluetooth remote. If you have that, that can trigger the camera remotely. And finally, our last option is to connect with AirPods. So if you do have Apple AirPods, you can connect them via Bluetooth, and you can use the AirPods as your microphone for your Insta360 Ace Pro. And with that, I'm gonna go ahead and swipe up, and those are our quick access settings. All right, everyone, let's get into our best video settings. So there are actually 3 modes of operation when it comes to shooting video on this camera. The first is our standard video mode. Second is what's called pure video, which is better in low light performance. And finally, we have free frame video, where you can actually reframe the video after you shoot it. Now, I am gonna recommend that for low light videography, we go with the pure video mode. And here's the reason. The secret sauce of this camera is that it actually has a true 8K sensor. Now, 8K is, I think, a little bit of a hype train thing. Not many people have 8K TVs to view 8K content on, so it's not that big of a like, oh my gosh, it's amazing. But the way that Insta360 has implemented the 8K sensor is pretty cool. So first and foremost, you actually can shoot 8K video, not in the pure video mode. We can see here we're topped out at 4K for our resolution. But if we went to normal video, we can use 8K. The secret sauce though is don't shoot 8K, especially in low light, shoot 4K. And what the camera is gonna do is it's gonna do what's called pixel binning. Essentially, it's gonna take every 4 pixels on the 8K sensor that's capturing the footage, and it's gonna average them together and turn them into 1 pixel. So we essentially get 1/4 the resolution, well, 1/4 of 8K is 4K as far as number of pixels is concerned. And we're going to get about half the amount of noise or artifacting grossness in our video. So what this leaves us with, this 8K sensor, but shooting 4K, gives us better, cleaner looking footage, particularly in low light shooting environments. And I really like the way they've done this, and I really recommend for all of you out there who are going to shoot in low light, use the Pure Video 4K mode. Now, what is resolution? I'm throwing around 8K, 4K, all these things. All resolution is if you look at a piece of video recorded to your memory card and you zoom in super far and you count every little pixel or square of light across the surface of your video clip. In 4K, you will count about 4,000 pixels across by about 2,000 pixels tall, 3840 by 2160 to be exact. At 8K, you'd count about 8,000 pixels across. So a higher resolution gives us crisper looking video footage. It also gives us the ability to zoom in on our footage. Most videos are exported these days at HD quality or full HD quality, which is 1920 by 1080. That's what you see on Instagram. It's what you see on a lot of YouTube. It's what you see all over the place. Well, if you shoot a higher resolution than you output to, it gives us as a videographer the ability to punch in or zoom in on whatever it is we captured. Now, the problem is there's a limit, and these tiny little cameras that, claim to shoot 6K, 12K, 8K, all the Ks, there's always a little bit of a downside. And that's where this, I like to shoot 4K, even though the sensor's capable of 8K, comes in. We're maximizing our low light performance and the quality that this camera can use. So I figured I'd just show you guys in real time and let you hear what this looks like. This is, it's the middle of the night. I mean, we've got no sky color, no skylight coming down, and in a small town, so we've got, minimal amount of light. This is 4K, 30 frames per second, and this is the pure video mode. This is what it looks like. So this is kind of best case. Like I said, this is the 8K sensor that's then downsampling to 4K to give you a reduced amount of noise. And just to give you a little comparison, here is 8K on the camera, so no downsampling, the original full resolution, so to speak, and this is the quality that you can expect from this. So we're seeing a real big kind of contrast between the best the camera can do and then really pushing the camera to its limits of resolution that really is not where low light, where it's supposed to shine. So this mode is not really where we would normally use the camera, but here's what 8K looks like at night. The next decision that we need to make on top of resolution, you guys can see in the pure video mode, we actually have 4K, 2.7K, or 1080p. I can't really see many reasons why I would want to use a lower resolution unless we were really tight on memory card space and we needed to fit as much on a card as possible. But really for low light, I'm gonna be staying on 4K 99% of the time. The next thing we have an option for is frame rate. Now, frame rate is simply how many frames per second the camera captures over time. So if you shoot 10 seconds of footage at 30 frames per second, you will be left with 300 total frames. And a frame is just a still image that is strung together really fast to make it look like video. So the video that you're watching right now is at 30 frames per second. If I shot this video at 10 frames per second, you would actually see my hands going as I moved. So higher frame rate gives us smoother motion, gives us a more natural looking motion to a certain point. And I recommend 30 frames per second for most everybody. You may read somewhere that 24 FPS or frames per second is a little bit more cinematic. And there are people out there in the world who can actually see the difference between 30 and 24. I'm not one of those people. If I look at 30 FPS next to 24 FPS, it looks the same to me. So I shoot 30 purely because, and you can't see these options here, but one big advantage of shooting a higher than 30 frame per second clip is that you can use slow motion. You can slow it down. Now you'll notice that that is not an option here in the pure video mode. And that's again, because this is optimized for low light. If we're trying to shoot fast action, say a skier going off a jump or something like that, what we can do is go back to normal video mode, go into our options by tapping the lower left right here. and we can go our resolution. I'm going to actually bring it down to 4K. Again, I don't recommend 8K in most situations. I like that pixel binning that this camera will do, so I want to make sure I make the most of that. And now I can go up to 4K 60 or even 4K at 120 frames per second. Now, what does this mean? Well, if good video is at 30 FPS, 30 frames per second, if you shoot video at 60 frames per second, you can actually play that video back at 1/2 speed or half as fast as it was captured, and you'll still have 30 frames per second to work with because half of 60 is 30. So this means if you shoot 60 frame per second footage, you can play it back at 1/2 speed and it will look really good. So you're a mountain biker, you're going off a jump, you want to get that epic shot in the air and you're getting some sick stuff. Shoot 60 FPS and you can slow it down in post-production. You go to 120 frames per second and now you can slow it down even more to 1/4 speed to get even more of that slow motion effect. Now do be aware, there is a downside. The more frames per second you shoot, you are going to lose quality in the footage, particularly on an action camera. So if you have like a cine camera that can shoot 4K at a 120, it's gonna look the same at 120 as it does at 60 as it does at 30. It's made to do that. But when you have an action camera, the harder you push these cameras, there are always corners cut to make it work. Sometimes it's a little bit of extra blurriness in the footage or a little bit of compression or something like that. So my recommendation is only use a higher frame rate if you need a higher frame rate. If you're just vlogging with this camera, heck, for vlogging, for most of what I would do, if it was low light, I'd be pure video mode. I'd go into my settings, I'd say 4K 30. If I was vlogging and there was plenty of available light, I'd go normal video mode and I would do the same thing, 4K at 30 frames per second. So just keep that in mind. I will point out as well that there's a little marker that says HDR down here at the bottom. HDR stands for high dynamic range. It will give you more quality in your highlights and your shadows of your video clip. So HDR mode is turned on automatically by the camera when you use a compatible frame rate and resolution. So 4K 30 in normal video mode, we do get HDR, which is gonna give us better quality video as well. So again, if you can, if you don't need the high frame rate to get the slow motion, use the slower frame rate to get HDR and get that better image quality. You probably get the idea that frame rate and resolution are like two of the most important things in videography. So understanding those and getting those down is super critical. Again, my walk around go-to for most things, 4K 30, and then I will increase the frame rate as needed if I want to do slow motion with that footage. The next little button I want to talk about is this double arrow down here. Now, I'm going to take a trip down Nerd Town for a second. So if you're not on the nerd train, you might want to skip ahead to the next section, but we're going down it and I can't stop myself now, so here we go. Action cameras, GoPros, Insta360s, DJIs, whatever you're talking about, for the most part, do not have optical zoom, meaning that the lens inside the camera does not zoom in or zoom out. It's not an optical zooming camera. But all of these action cameras have a digital zoom, and on the surface, that's what this appears to be. You tap the little button and the camera zooms in, it punches in a little bit. And that's what I figured it was at first too. Most cameras have that. I don't recommend digital zoom because digital zoom is just cropping, and you can crop in post-production if you want to. So I don't really ever recommend cropping in the camera. Here's the difference. This little zoom button is exactly a 2x zoom. And first off, for the non-nerd train users, use this zoom if you want to. It's really cool. Anyway, for the nerd train users, it looks like digital zoom, but it's not. What it's doing is it's only available on the 4K mode, not the 8K mode. 8K, it becomes unavailable. We don't have 8K in pure video, but if you go to normal video, you go to 8K, you won't see that little option. And the reason is this. In 4K, without the zoom turned on, like I said earlier, the camera is pixel binning. It is averaging every 4 pixels together on the sensor, and it's turning them into 1 pixel in the final video. That reduces noise. It gives us a cleaner looking photo. It's called downsampling. It's amazing. It works really, really well. Well, when you tap this button, it stops doing that, and it just uses 1 pixel on the sensor equals 1 pixel on the recording. It does exactly a 2x zoom. So we lose image quality. We're definitely going to have worse low light performance when we use this, but it's available all the time. So in available light situations, it can be a fantastic way to zoom in, and it's kind of this magical hybrid between a digital zoom, which I never recommend to people, and an optical zoom where the lens actually zooms. This is something that I would use if we're in a plenty of available light situation. Love this button, and I wish more cameras would innovate with this type of feature. Taking an 8K sensor, usually running it at 4K, but also giving you the ability to run at 8K or 8K as a zoom, as a 2x zoom function for your 4K footage. Okay, nerd train over. Let's get back into the camera. Here is normal video mode. This is HDR 4K 30. And what I'm gonna do is use the fancy zoom button to zoom in. So now instead of using the 8K sensor and binning down to 4K, it's just using every pixel on the 8K sensor. We'll go. There's one more button I want to mention, and that's this little de-warp button. We have a few different options. We have Action, Ultra, and de-warp. Super simple. Action is going to give you the widest field of view. It's going to make the video footage look the most immersive. If you're an action sports athlete, shoot action. If you're looking for that FPV view, that first-person video, first-person view mode, you're gonna want action. It's gonna be immersive. Ultra is actually wide as well. This is gonna give you another option for outdoor recreational activities. And then finally, de-warp. This is gonna be if you're trying to use your action camera as a normal camera. It kind of gets rid of that fisheye effect, and it just gives you standard linear footage that looks like you shot it with your phone or you shot it with a DSLR or mirrorless camera. All right, we're almost there. The final thing I want to get into is our pro or extra settings that you can set dependent on the mode that you're in. Now, for our low light performance, I'm going to swipe in from the right side on the pure video mode, and we have 3 options under auto. Now, I would actually say I usually shoot action cameras on auto. I find that they do a really good job 9 times out of 10, and I can't actually beat what I'm doing on the action camera by using a manual mode, and I can't really get better than what auto does. So we do have a few things in here. EV is your exposure value compensation. All this means is if you're looking at the back of the camera and your footage looks a little bit too dark or it looks a little bit too bright before you capture it, you can overexpose or underexpose that footage. Give it more light or give it less light. This is measured in stops. If you've worked as a photographer or a videographer, you'll know what those are. It's double or half the amount of light. But the point is, if your footage looks dark, move it to the plus side. If the footage looks bright, move it to the minus side. So that gives us an override to our brightness. This little guy right here is our low light stabilization. This just improves the stabilization in low light environments. I would recommend you have this on, particularly in low light, which is what we're focusing on in this video. Finally, we have white balance. We do have an auto or a manual setting. This would be the one that I would consider setting manually. White balance is the color temperature of light. Light actually has a color to it. Some light is white, like the light that's illuminating my face right now. Some light's orange, some light's blue. There's light all over the place. And this lets us compensate for that by adjusting the color temperature of the camera. Thing is, on auto, when you switch, when you like go from one room to another, you can actually sometimes see the camera shifting in white balance. And in those situations where you are going to be changing locations in one clip, I probably would leave it on auto. But if you're not changing locations, sometimes the camera gets tricked and it thinks you are. It'll see a bunch of green trees in your frame, so it'll add a lot of red to compensate or magenta to compensate. So if you can, if you're in a situation where you are shooting under a consistent light source, I would actually take the time to manually set this. Like right now in this room, these lights are 5500K, and you all can see if I set my white balance to 5500K, the footage under here looks, it's contrasty, but it looks very evenly orange. The table looks, the table right here looks like the table through the camera. Whereas if I was on auto, you can see how blue the table looks in the back of the camera. It's seeing all the warmth on the table and it's trying to neutralize it or blue it in. So I would take a time to do my white balance, but EV compensation and that low light stabilization, those are pretty much the defaults. I'm gonna leave it on all the time. One final thing I'll point out is in the normal video mode, if we swipe over to just standard video and we swipe in from the right, just like we did before, we do have a couple other options. Namely, the one that I really like is this one that's called face priority. This isn't face focus like you would see on a mirrorless camera or a DSLR. This is actually face priority for exposure. So it's going to identify faces in the scene and it's going to use those as its exposure basis. I haven't played with this too much, but you will see little boxes popping up on the camera screen as it identifies faces and uses them for exposure. Just don't think that it's focusing. It can't do that. Again, this is a fixed focus, fixed zoom lens. All right, everyone, and that is the setup of the Insta360 Ace Pro. So hopefully you like this video. If you have a question, leave it in the comments section down below. I know we focused more on low light performance in the pure video mode and didn't get much into photo settings. If you guys are interested in other videos, let me know down in the comments section. Lastly, hit the like button below. I would really appreciate it, and hit subscribe to stay up to date with future videos. We are excited to make a whole slew of videos, maybe on this camera, maybe on other things, but we'd love to have you follow along. Thanks, everybody, and I'll catch you in the next one.